There's a lot to dig into here. Let's get right to it.
So a really strong point, maybe the strongest part of the whole piece, is this idea of the customer service effect.
Yes.
It's a fantastic analogy for Pearl's worldview. The creator compares her to a customer service worker who thinks the whole company's broken just because they only ever hear complaints.
It's a great diagnosis of sample bias.
Exactly.
It explains why she thinks that way, instead of just saying she's wrong. It nails that she only talks to men who feel shafted by divorce.
And it even brings in lawyers who also only see the worst cases.
But here's our first point of critique. The customer service effect is a powerful analytical lens that grounds the entire argument, but it represents a missed opportunity because it isn't applied broadly enough.
I agree. You feel this is kind of underutilized?
Totally. It's a brilliant insight laid out perfectly in that one segment, but then it just
Disappeared.
it gets dropped. And I wonder if the whole piece could be stronger by threading that metaphor through the entire script. It could create a much more cohesive narrative.
Okay, so that's an interesting thought. How do you see that working in a practical sense?
Well, let's look at the part about the 70% statistic.
Right, that 70% of divorces are filed by...
The creator does a decent job explaining, that filing is often a defensive legal move to protect finances.
But you're saying the connection isn't explicit enough. Exactly. It's just a counterfact. But what if the script re-invoked the metaphor right there?
So you'd actually say,
You'd say, here is the customer service effect in action again. We're looking at the filing paperwork, the complaint ticket, and assuming the woman is the problem.
when the root cause.
The manufacturing defect, right, might be the husband's behavior, him leaving or not paying the mortgage. It frames it perfectly. It reinforces the central thesis instead of just being another point on a list.
And I'm guessing that applies to the end of the piece as well.
Absolutely. The discussion on veteran suicide. Pearl's argument is that they come home to an empty house.
And the creator correctly points out it's about PTSD, not a lack of a wife.
Right. But imagine if the script said, Pearl sees the result, the suicide, and blames the immediate contact. That's the customer service rep blaming the customer for being angry while ignoring that the product was broken by war.
That ties everything back to that core idea, surface observation versus the root cause.
It gives the whole piece a much stronger spine.
Okay, that's a great point. But while that framework is strong, there's a bit of an issue with how the creator handles her own arguments later on.
I think I know where you're going with this.
The creator successfully critiques her opponent for relying on anecdotes over data, but undermines her own authority by falling into the same trap during the custody discussion.
That's where it wobbles, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, she rightly calls out Pearl for having no data on things like false rape allegations, and she contrasts it with Kasparian's specific stats. Very rigorous.
But then
we get to 50-50 custody, and she starts using phrases like, I have heard some people say, and I do wonder if.
And that's the friction point, isn't it? The weakness is hypocrisy. I mean, if you're going to spend a good chunk of time mocking your opponent for relying on random stories, can you then turn around and use I heard some kids can't make friends as your evidence?
It just invites that charge of inconsistency. So how do we make this stronger?
Well, the suggestion is to replace that speculation with actual data. Or, if that's not possible, to be really clear about the subjectivity.
The problem isn't having an opinion. It's how you frame it.
Precisely. It's framing an anecdote as a factual counterargument right after you've scolded someone else for doing that exact thing.
So what are some concrete ways to fix this?
The ideal path is to find the research. Instead of, I heard it's confusing, you cite a child development study about nesting.
Nesting?
Yeah, that's the term where the kids stay in the family home and the parents rotate. There's real data on that versus moving location. Using a term like that instantly makes the creator sound like the expert she is.
Okay, but what if the data isn't handy? Or it's just not conclusive?
That's fair. In that case, you have to pivot the framing. You just state it explicitly.
How so?
You'd say something like, okay, putting the data aside for a moment, my personal intuition, and this is subjective, is that moving is hard on kids. It creates a firewall.
Right. It separates the objective critique from a personal take.
And that protects her credibility. It shows the audience, I know the difference between a fact and a feeling, which is the very thing she's arguing her opponent doesn't.
That distinction is key. And speaking of credibility and audience trust, let's talk about the tone.
Ah, yes.
The tone of the critique occasionally slips from objective analysis into ad hominem dismissal, which risks alienating that movable middle of the audience.
Yeah, people who might be on the fence.
I'm thinking about the student exam analogy, where Pearl is compared to a student who just crams.
Or describing her body language as a young child being scolded.
And especially including that clip of Anna calling her a privileged piece of S and then explicitly agreeing with it.
Look, it's satisfying for the home, for people who already agree.
Sure.
But the weakness is that it just screams by. A neutral viewer might hear that and just dismiss all the valid points as haters hating. You go from being an impartial expert to a partisan reactor. You lose the high ground.
So the suggestion is to maybe adopt more of a steelman approach?
Exact. Before you dismantle the argument, you have to validate the feeling behind it.
Okay, let's make that concrete. How could that work?
All right, take the moment where Pearl has that awkward silence because she has no data.
Right, instead of just mocking her.
Instead of mocking her, you frame it as a flaw in the ideology of the manosphere itself. You could say, the reason she has no data here isn't just a personal failing. It's because this entire movement is built on felt truth rather than empirical truth.
That's a much bigger, more intellectual critique. It attacks the movement, not just the person.
It's devastating because it's not petty.
And what about that cheaper to keep her rhyme?
Perfect example. Right now, it's just dismissed. But you could start by saying, look, I understand why this phrase resonates. Watching half your assets vanish in a divorce feels like a robbery. That fear is real.
You validate the pain first.
You validate the pain, then you hit them with the reality. But the data actually shows that for men, single life without a dual income is often the fastest path to financial instability. You're telling them, I see your pain, but your solution is wrong. That's how you win over the middle.
That's a much more persuasive strategy. It stops people from just getting defensive. Okay, moving on to the overall structure.
The flow of the argument.
Yes, the video effectively lists individual rebuttals on alimony, marriage benefits, custody, but it misses the chance to synthesize these into a broader theme about the economic reality of modern marriage.
I agree. The points are there, but they feel a bit disconnected, like a list.
Right. The creator points out the trad wife contradiction, that Pearl wants women at home, but wants to remove alimony, the very safety net that makes it possible.
And then, separately, it lists the benefits for men: health insurance, tax breaks, parental rights.
Exactly. But the weakness is that it feels like a laundry list of gotchas.
Oh, and another thing.
Precisely. So I wonder, have we thought about grouping all these points under a single unified theme? Something like the economic contract of marriage.
So how do you weave that together? How do you answer the "so what" question with that?
Well, the suggestion is to tie those points together more directly. Take the parental rights section.
Where unmarried men have no say in adoption or travel.
Yes, you tie that directly to the risk of the tradwife model. You frame marriage not just as a good thing, but as a necessary legal contract to achieve the very goals the manosphere claims to want.
That's fascinating. So it's not just a list of perks. You're arguing their own stated goals require the very thing they say they hate.
Exactly. You could state the irony explicitly. To get the patriarchal control and legacy you say you want, you must sign the government contract you say you hate.
That turns it from a list of facts into a really profound insight.
It shows the opponent isn't just wrong about the facts, they're wrong about their own self-interest. It connects alimony, taxes, and custody into one single powerful argument.
That's a much deeper cut. Okay, last point. Let's look at the pacing and the ending.
The conclusion suffers from a really jarring tonal shift. It goes from a tragic discussion of veteran suicide directly into a standard YouTube call to action.
Yeah, that was abrupt.
The final big point is this rebuttal about veteran suicide, with the creator correctly pointing out it's about trauma and PTSD. But immediately after the words unalive themselves, it pivots to, if you found this video interesting, like and subscribe.
It just takes you right out of the moment. The weakness there is emotional dissonance. You can't end on such a heavy topic and then immediately ask for engagement.
It feels callous.
It does. It feels transactional right after being deeply human. It treats the topic of suicide as just more content.
So what we need is some kind of a bridge.
We need a cool-down bridge, a buffer zone.
And what would that sound like?
The suggestion is simple. After the veteran point, just zoom out for a sec. Don't go to the outro. Summarize the main thesis of the whole video.
So you'd say something like,
whether it's veteran mental health, divorce law, or custody, the common thread here is that complex problems can't be solved by blaming women. Something like that.
And that would be the perfect place to bring back the central metaphor we talked about at the start?
100%. Bring back the customer service analogy for a final bow.
So remember, don't let the complaints department dictate your view of the whole institution of marriage.
Exact. That gives the audience closure. It lifts the mood back to the intellectual argument. Then, and only then, do you ask them to subscribe. It respects their emotional state.
It feels like you're taking care of the viewer, not just mining them for clicks.
It's about emotional stewardship of your audience.
Okay, so this gives us a very clear path forward. The piece is already strong, especially that core analogy. It just needs a bit more structural unity and a more consistent tone.
Absolutely. The raw material is great. It just needs that final editorial polish to go from being a good reaction video to a definitive critique.
So let's quickly summarize the actionable steps for the rewrite.
First, apply that customer service analogy globally. Make it the lens for the divorce stats and the veteran suicide point. It unifies the whole script.
Second,
Bring your personal opinions up to the same standard of evidence you demand from others. For the custody section, either find the data on nesting or explicitly label your opinion as a subjective take. Avoid that hypocrisy trap.
third,
Soften the ad hominem attacks to persuade the middle. Validate the audience's fear or pain before you correct their logic. Stay the objective expert in the room.
and finally,
Smooth the transition out of the heavy topic. Use a cool-down summary after the suicide discussion before you ask for a subscription. Bring it all together.
an excellent summary. We really hope these suggestions help to refine the work and make that next draft even more impactful.
We would love to see how this evolves.
Please submit the revised script for a follow-up critique.
We'd love to see the changes in action.
Until next time.
This has been The Critique.